lemon cakes because she was on a diet. She would be like, here's a lemon cake, and it was just not, it's not what I wanted. But that perhaps speaks to my own issues with chocolate. So I'm just really exhausted, man, and I'm like deep in revising all these short stories. So I'm gonna read something very new. I wrote it today. Very weird and very short, so that's good for you guys. It's a retelling of the story of an hour, which is actually only 1,000 words, from the perspective of a beloved character who I think is underestimated and misunderstood. So it's called The Story of the Christmas Eve. Holly tells the old woman the news gently, afraid of spooking her. She puts a hand on her shoulder, places a bright red mug of cocoa in front of her, looks deep into her crinkly blue eyes. He had some turbulence over Greenland, ma'am, she says. Ice storm, might be tough to get through, but we're tracking it best we can. She considers the old woman for a moment, holds her at arm's length as she inspects her expression. Only when she is satisfied with it does she rush from the room, barking orders into a headset. But the old woman is not worried. This happens every year in one form or another. Christmas travel is hell no matter your mode of transportation. So she returns to waiting, which seems now to be the default position of her life. She waits for him to come home on Christmas Eve, waits for him to finish up the new toy development and marketing campaigns in early spring, waits for him to finish toy production in the fall, and then in the winter to finish training the new reindeer. Oh no, they don't come knowing how to fly, and despite the magic, they don't live forever and are constantly being replaced and retrained. There's a whole Rudolph graveyard out back, each headstone only distinguishable from the next by a Roman numeral, and the intensity of the eerie red glow emanating from the snow around it. Her life is defined by his, always waiting for him to finish a task, never included in it. She doesn't even have her own name, just Mrs. Claus, the chubby, jovial female counterpart of her husband's fame. She isn't even chubby. By now, she's wasted away. How can she eat when she's always worried about Santa putting on enough weight, always fretting over his incessant demand for cookies? Ooh, spooky cookies! So, cookies, that's where we left off. It wasn't always like this. Those first few Christmases she spent in the back of the sleigh, organizing presents and checking names off the list as the wind whipped her hair and cold bit her cheeks. He needed her then, before the elf population growth and eventually GPS tracking and the Nice and Naughty app. Back then, she was part of something. Holly knocks softly. Mrs. Claus nods. Well, we've well lost track of the sleigh, ma'am. What do you mean lost track of it? He's no longer showing up on the GPS. I'm just letting you know, ma'am. I'll tell you as soon as we have any more information. Holly doesn't inspect her expression this time, just hurries away. There was something in her eyes as she spoke, or rather a lack of something, a missing sparkle, which is a grave rarity for elves. Mrs. Claus feels her chest tighten. She thinks of him out there, of course not wearing his long underwear, just that ridiculous red and white coat. He likes to pretend he's Vin Diesel or The Rock or Jason Statham, strong, virile men who have no need for long underwear or vegetables. Just cookies and milk, straight up with a side of steroids. But Santa skips the steroids, not good for keeping his stomach like a bowl full of jelly, and to defy a night before Christmas would be a travesty. She watches the snow fall thick and white, weighing down branches until they fall to the ground. Santa will cut them up for firewood once the snow melts in the summer. She feels bad for them almost, the branches, though she knows how absurd that sounds. She understands what it's like to feel weighed down, buried, like no one can see you. She raises her eyes skyward, looks at the snowflakes still floating down lightly, not trapped under the weight of others, just free. She imagines herself driving the sleigh, a new one with more glitter. She'd always ask for directions, never spend hours zooming over China like Santa did a few years ago. She'd make herself a new outfit, a full bright skirt with real fur edges, PETA be damned. She wouldn't be either of the two costume options listed on Amazon, an aging, outdated old woman or slutty Santa girl in a too short skirt. And she'd give the kids books because they all play too many video games, and she'd be harsher about the naughty list because so many of those kids are too spoiled, and instead of cookies, the children would leave out wine and cheese. And best of all, she'd fly. She'd make those reindeer go faster than they ever have, higher than ever, until the oxygen got too thin to breathe. She'd redefine a woman's touch, from the way she baked cookies and mended Santa's coat to the firm grip she had on the reins, the strength and speed with which she rappelled down the chimney. She was thinner than Santa anyway. She wouldn't need the help of magic to get down, an enhancement Santa took with more shame than men who take Viagra to get up. She could do this. But suddenly there's the jingling of bells, followed by that full-bodied, robust, fake laugh she'd heard too many times, the one that made her feel empty, the one that made her long for the real laugh she hadn't heard in too long. Ho, ho, ho. He was home. Oh, that sound, the joy that kills.